is we're going to talk about Azure Stack, right? We're going to talk about this new hybrid cloud thing that Microsoft has, right? And pretty exciting stuff. It's been coming for a long time, a lot of hype about it probably, and awesome to have everybody here today. So, let's dive in. Let's take a look at this thing. And what's interesting is kind of we have this whole universe of Azure now, right? We've got applications and operations and tools and experiences, all these different things that Microsoft's been working very hard for, geez, almost a decade now to build for the cloud. And, you're probably really familiar with, Azure in the public. We've got the national clouds like the German cloud, the China cloud, things like that. Department of Defense, even down in the government. And, that's public, right? But then there's this whole new universe, right? This new Azure Stack universe. And with Azure Stack, the idea is that all of those things on the top, all the applications that you can write, the languages it supports, everything that you've been learning maybe about Azure for the last few years can now be used and implemented in your own data center, right? And that's a big change. It's a big change now, and this entire ecosystem and everything that you've learned about Azure in the public cloud and what you are focusing on there can all of a sudden be done in a private cloud, right? And all those answers to, hey, we can't go to the cloud because of security or because of, regulatory issues, compliance, or something like that, data governance, whatever it might be, you can actually use Azure locally now. And there's two different ways that works, right? We've got the service providers and then the people that are rolling it out in their own enterprise, right? So in the service providers, what I mean is there's hosters around the world that right now are really coming on board and online with Azure Stack. So, you're going to see some of the big kind of traditional hosting companies or maybe the telecom providers that are going to start offering Azure Stack in the same way that maybe had something in Rackspace or at AT&T or wherever you are around the world, you will be able to leverage Azure implementations in their data centers, right? So you don't even have to take on the burden. You can use a hoster, or obviously thousands of enterprises, right? If you have an enterprise company, you have your own data center, and you're looking to do cloud applications, but they can't be in the public cloud, and they can't be at hosters. They could be at your location, right? Okay. Now, it's really important, first of all, to kind of define a few things, right? And I think that this is really interesting. Azure Stack, what it is and what it isn't, right? So what it is really a hybrid cloud platform, right? And I mentioned all those tools and everything, and you could think of Linux as a platform or Android as a platform, iOS, Windows, whatever it might be. Azure is a platform, right? You can write things that run in Azure. If you write an app and you put it in the App Store, or put it in Google Play, it'll run on almost all Android devices typically, right? As long as you follow their rules. Same thing with Azure. If you write an application that runs in Azure Public or Azure Government or something like that, it should work in Azure Stack. And that's the idea of this cloud platform. And it supports infrastructure as a service as well as platform as a service, right? And it really is kind of an extension of Azure in a way. And we're going to talk all about what that means and kind of how that isn't. Now, what it quote unquote isn't. It isn't private cloud. You'll hear that term a lot, and private cloud. What does that mean? This is not private cloud. It in the sense that you could call your vCenter, your vSphere infrastructure a private cloud, right? If you treat it that way. This is Azure in your data center. It's a platform that you implement. Now, you might treat it like a private cloud, okay? There's a lot of things you could do, but now it also isn't a virtualization replacement. This is not something that you necessarily do to get rid of Hyper-V or get rid of VMware, right? Although you might do that, it isn't necessarily a full-on replacement of that. It's not a hypervisor, right? Hyper-V, VMware are hypervisors. Azure is a platform. It's a platform that you can write to. It supports languages. It supports all kinds of services. There's no load balancer built into VMware, right? So, that's the type of thing that we're talking about. So let's keep looking. Let's take what makes Azure Stack this hybrid cloud thing we talked about, really, and it's an extension of Azure, but on premises, right? Okay, and it gives you the ability to basically implement the same types of services and use the same code for deploying your infrastructure, so the same language and the same architecture that you designed to implement out in Azure on-prem, right? In the sense that it's not in the public cloud. Okay, on-prem, as we saw a few seconds ago, could be in a hosted provider. It could be in your own data center, right? It's just not in the public cloud. The public cloud is going to be Azure, right? Azure National, Azure Commercial, Azure China, whatever it might be, right? Okay. Now, what makes this thing kind of a hybrid cloud or sort of a platform that works in both places, if you will, and kind of simplify it, first of all, is the marketplace syndication, right? So if you're familiar with Azure, one of the really cool things, and other cloud platforms, like AWS, they have these marketplaces, right, where companies publish their images, right? Okay, so Oracle has databases and Oracle Linux out in the Azure Marketplace, or whomever it might be, SUSE or SAP, whatever. And you have the ability to actually download, okay, a lot of those images down into your Azure Stack. So the images, let's say for your Ubuntu servers that you're leveraging out in the public Azure cloud, you can download that same image to Azure Stack, right? And the beautiful thing is that first of all, it's ready for Azure in both places. Second of all, it's managed by the provider who's publishing that into Azure, so it's ready, right? It's got all the components that it needs, that sort of thing. And it also helps you to not have to kind of recreate the wheel, right? You're not having to create all these images on your own. Now, of course, you can create your own images in Azure. You can create your own images for Azure Stack. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people are doing that clearly, but this does make it sort of almost feel like just a few clicks away to get to some really awesome curated images. For example, Bitnami, if you're familiar with them, has a fantastic website. With just a few clicks, you can roll out, like Jenkins or some kind of complicated platform to AWS or to Azure or wherever it might be. You can download those images to Azure Stack. Okay, so it really sort of makes the time, removes the time and the pain and a million searches on the internet to try to figure out how to make this stuff work for the people that are trying to stitch it all together, right? And a few other things here, really this unified framework, right? This control plane that Azure has, known as Azure Resource Manager, or for short we always call it ARM, is really the framework for deploying things, for managing resources and VMs, and also for securing them and that sort of thing. And so the same effort and work that you put into building something for Azure, that effort and work will be able to just plug and play work down in Azure Stack, right? You could do development in Azure Stack locally and then push those same solutions out into Azure Prod, right? Azure Public, right? And so that's really what Microsoft is going for here. And I love this quote from Steve Buchanan, who's one of the MVPs from Microsoft on Azure Stack, and he's a trainer for us here at Opsgility. He's written a lot of content, and I love this. Cloud is not a place; it's a model. And running in the cloud, if you think about it, really, it's just running on somebody else's computer and somebody else's data center. But with Azure, it's a model, right? It's an approach to delivering and adopting and consuming systems in a different way than we used to, right? And cloud not being a place but being a way that you implement something is a key takeaway from today, and a key takeaway for you when you think about what Azure is. So let's talk a little bit more about what you can do on this thing. So I mentioned Azure IaaS and PaaS, right? And one thing that you'll probably read if you've read some blogs or even trade publications about Azure Stack is that it feels like it's a little lean right now. It just has kind of the core basics, and that's okay. Microsoft has said, it comes straight out of the box with some solutions, and from the IaaS perspective, you're going to get kind of the core what we call resource providers, right? So compute, storage, network, and key vaults, and the items here are like virtual machines and blob storage, okay, virtual networks and load balancers, things like that, and then the key vault where you can create keys and build certificates and things like that out of the implementation that comes straight from out of the box today, right? And then there's also some really neat platform as a service resource providers, okay, and these are going to be like the SQL database service. And even now they have MySQL, okay, which is very cool. MySQL is in preview even in the public cloud, but you're going to have that as a platform as a service tier. So you'll be able to roll out SQL databases and MySQL databases, and you don't have to patch them anymore, right? The system is going to patch them for you now, right? And then there's the app service, which is kind of the mainstay of PaaS services in Azure Public, in the sense that web apps, mobile apps, API apps, even Azure Functions, so like serverless compute, things like that are available. And then Service Fabric, which is a really interesting system for writing microservices applications, is also available. And I can guarantee you that Microsoft is going to continue to invest heavily in this. Azure Stack has been one of the primary goals that Microsoft has had to really round out the Azure story, and they're going to be investing heavily in this over the next year as it starts to be adopted. Now, from the perspective of deployment options, there is somewhat of a barrier of entry here to get started with the deployment of Azure Stack, and much different than Azure Public, where you can just a credit card and bang your head on the keyboard and you're building things out in the public cloud, and that's the beauty of the public cloud. With Azure Stack, it's much different. You have to take on some responsibility to build and procure some hardware and some pieces to do this. Now, on your own, you can implement a developer kit, right, which is sort of a single node kind of deployment of Azure Stack. It's great for frankly learning the platform, for developers, things like that. Proof of concepts, trials, this sort of thing are excellent. Pretty heavy requirements on the hardware though out of the gate, okay? We're talking like, I think it's 96 gig of RAM and 12 cores maybe is kind of the minimum barrier to entry, and some pretty healthy, I think you need 5 disks. I mean, so you can go read about it, but it's a pretty healthy machine that you need to get it running. Now, here at Opsgility, I'm going to show you, we actually have it running in our real-time labs. We have been doing some research and development on this, and we actually have a system for you. I'm going to do a demo for you here at the end and show you what Azure Stack Development Kit looks like in Azure running on our platform. So pretty neat. And if you want to do some of our training, because we've got some training courses on it already online, you can do that, as well as if you take one of those courses like that virtual course James was mentioning earlier, you'll get into a real Azure Stack, because you got to get your hands on it, right? It's weird because you'll see it when we get in there. It looks and feels like Azure, because it's Azure Stack. So if you're familiar with it, you'll pretty quick you'll be using it. But there's a few extra things to learn. Now, when we go talking about going to production, or service providers, what they're going to build, they're going to use an Azure Stack integrated system, right? And what this is this is a it really is kind of a stack of servers, right? And network switches, things like that comes together in kind of a pre-built package, right? And there's only certain vendors that you can use to buy this from. Like here it says Dell and EMC, HP, that sort of thing. And you're going to have an experience where you're going to buy that. They're going to bring it to your location and kind of start it up, get it plugged in, get it set up, turned on and that sort of thing, and then you'll have to get it integrated with your Azure Active Directory, and then from there they'll turn it over to you and you can get cracking, right? So this is kind of like I mentioned, an integrated system, right, where the hardware and the software and all that's kind of installed, right? And you do have to purchase the hardware, so you'll have to go through your normal kind of procurement avenues to purchase that. But the interesting part is that you purchase the Azure services from Microsoft, right? So in the past, you probably, maybe you bought some HP hardware, you bought, a SAN or something from EMC, you've got, some switches, and you've got to wire all that together. Then you need to put ESX on there. You got to buy a vCenter. Then you have to buy Windows licenses. You have to talk to all these people. In this particular case, what you do is you just buy the hardware, and then everything behind that you're going to basically buy from Microsoft. Now, of course, if you have a few operating systems like, something from SUSE or something like that, you would still have to buy those licenses from them. But your day-to-day compute, what you pay for, what you consume, that sort of thing, is much in the same way as you do on the public cloud, right? Which brings me to the licensing area there. So it says basically, services for Azure Stack are licensed directly from Microsoft, right, if you will, via an enterprise agreement, or you can use a cloud solution provider and purchase from them the same way you can with Azure Public, right? And Azure Stack can be added to, enrollments, monetary commitments, enterprise agreements, things, licensing vehicles that you have today. And the same way, if you spin up a D2 VM in Azure, you're going to pay for that same type of D2 or whatever in Azure Stack. Okay, so what's interesting is that you buy the hardware, but then the sort of the licensing and all that's going to be baked in together with those services that you're going to purchase there. And then the support obviously is going to come from two avenues. Your support for the hardware is obviously going to come from the vendor that you bought it from. If it's Dell or Lenovo, you need to have a contract that's purchased when you buy that hardware. And then, of course, the support for the Azure piece is going to come from Microsoft, right? And if you have like an existing Premier support contract or something like that, you can add those Azure Stack or add Azure Stack to that portfolio and gain support from Microsoft. So here's a couple of, just kind of a sneak peek of how this pricing looks for you. Like when you have a base virtual machine, you're basically going to be paying for the, by the minute per vCPU. Right? If it's a Windows server, you would pay for that same compute, which is the vCPU, plus, some sort of a license for Windows, unless you do the bring your own license. If you're familiar with the hybrid use benefits and things like that, because you've been working with Microsoft in the past, this is going to work the exact same way, right? Now your Azure storage is going to be by the gigabyte, your app service by the vCPU, functions by how many gigabits a second, that sort of thing. So it's the same sort of look and feel that you have today in terms of how you pay. It's not a lot different. This does get a little bit confusing. I would work with your provider to find out about this and understand it better, but what you'll quickly learn is that it's virtually identical to the way you purchase regular Azure for commercial. I mentioned some of the hardware providers. I want to give you a quick peek of how how this looks. I mean, these kind of look, and really, frankly, they're a lot like the hyper-converged systems that you've probably been seeing over the past few years. So, if you buy a hyper-converged system from Dell or HP, one of those, you're going to get sort of the machines with disk and top of rack servers. It's going to kind of come in a package. You just need to find a spot in your data center to plug it in and integrate it into your data center, and then you're good to go, right? So let's talk a little bit more about some key terminology with Azure Stack and some of the concepts. Now, of course, the first thing is hey, here's the portal, right? Just a different logo. It says Azure Stack on there. Can you see that? Now, this is an instance of the Azure portal that's running on those local boxes, right? And you have an isolated administrator portal, right? Because remember, you're the administrator now, right? That's one thing that you have to think of. Microsoft in the public cloud, they're the cloud administrator. Well, with Azure Stack, if you were to say, buy this, install it yourself and Microsoft sort of gives you the keys and says, have at it, Azure Stack, have fun, you're all of a sudden, you're the portal administrator, right? Which is a different experience. You're used to consuming Azure. Here you've got to set it up to be consumed, right? Which is kind of interesting. Okay. Now there's also the other side of it where you're pretending to be the user as well, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But the first thing we have to do is log into this administrator portal and get busy building your Azure region. Remember I mentioned there's 38 Azure regions around the world. Well, you're going to add another region. It's going to be a private region. It's your region, right? But it is a region. Okay. And if we go back here for a second, this hardware that you buy here, this is what we refer to as like a stamp, an Azure stamp. And inside of the Azure data centers, obviously they're huge, right? They're these mega data centers. There's thousands of these stamps, but this is your own little Azure stamp of compute and storage and networking that makes this all work, right? So you're going to use this portal. It's got different things in it. You might even see on there's one that says offers, there's region management, there's new pieces, and I'm going to show you some of that in the demo. So stick around to the end to check that out. Now, I mentioned Azure Resource Manager before, and this comes to play. Azure runs on ARM these days, so does Azure Stack. And this gives us the ability to deploy resources, to manage them in logical groupings with the resource groups, things like that. Okay. It also gives us the ability to do the role-based access control, where I can say, these people can access these resources, that sort of thing, right? So the way that you're used to working in Azure, if you've used it before, is the same manner that you're going to use Azure Stack. The skills are transferable because this is a platform. It's like going from a Windows 10 machine to a Windows Server 2016 machine. You on both of those platforms, where the control panel is, right? Okay. There's the computer manager. There's so that same sort of familiarity will come to you pretty quickly, which is the whole point of the hybrid cloud platform. Now, resource providers are really important, and resource providers are, these are the programmatic sort of implementations from Microsoft that allow us to build like virtual machines or virtual networks, things like that. And you'll hear people talk about them as resource providers, RPs, things like that. And these RPs are leveraged and used to basically tell Azure Stack what you can create, right? Or frankly, even as more of the cloud administrator, what you can offer for users to be able to create on new subscriptions that they create, right? Okay. And so if you wanted to add like a backup as a service or something like that, you would need to add that resource provider. If you want that MySQL we talked about, it's not in there out of the box. You have to add the resource provider. Okay. So it's a different paradigm where you are becoming, and you're sort of in control the way Microsoft is in control. They have all these millions of services out there. You're going to do that. You're going to turn on what you want people to use, right? Maybe some of you even work for solution providers, right? If you work for Rackspace or somebody like that, and they're going to offer, Azure Stack to the public, you all will have to create plans and offers to them where they'll create and use subscriptions that they can only build what you put out in terms of these resource providers. Now, the four foundational resource providers are networking, storage, compute, and Key Vault. I mentioned this earlier, but I just wanted to hit it again. And these are sort of the basis of what sort of makes Azure Stack even useful, right? Okay, and by having these, we can start to build really interesting things, and it allows us to start to offer, if you will, out to our customers Azure services in the form of Azure Stack. So let's take a quick look at some of this taxonomy, if you will, right, that makes Azure Stack work under the covers, right? Okay, so basically there's a long list here. We've got services, we have plans, offers, subscriptions. There's different personas that people take, like the cloud administrator, the tenant, that sort of thing. I've got a slide for each one of these. I'm going to kind of dive in here, and we'll talk about these real quick, and then we're going to get to that demo. So with services, basically this is what enables providers to deliver those services out there, right? Like MySQL or SQL Server or virtual machines, things like that, things that make something like SharePoint possible, okay? And these first come in the form of plans. Now, plans are basically groups of one or more of those services that we were talking about. So each service is added to a plan, and you can configure the quotas that you allow people to have, right? So that you know this plan that they can leverage, right? So for example, we see here it says an example plan has a region, right? So we might say, well, this is available in US and in Asia. What are the compute? Maybe they can do 2 virtual machines. They can use up to 10 CPU cores, right? And this plan would be a plan that they could leverage, right, inside of Azure Stack. Now, there's base plans, and these are included in all the subscriptions by default, and there's also add-on plans. The add-on plans are something that, doesn't necessarily have to be there, but when a provider is sort of working with their product management, or even you internally, your IT, you're thinking to yourself, what are we going to offer to developers or to the IT organization to leverage, right, on their subscriptions in Azure. Now, these plans, okay, are built into the offers, and offers are basically one or more plans that you want to present to your tenants, and by tenant I mean like an end customer, to be able to buy, right? Now they're subscribing in a subscription, but the idea here is what can they purchase, right? And offers can be attached to multiple regions. They can come with a set of base plans, and you can get kind of complicated with this. And as you start to use it and understand a little bit more, you can add to it. But I've got a couple examples here. So like in Asia, we might have an offer that's called Alpha, and we're offering inside of that the plan A, and that plan A has the services that we just talked about it, right? So we have services, we add them to plans, and then those individual plans can be added to offers, right? And then there's another one here. It says region Asia. It says offer Bravo. It has maybe plan A and plan B, okay? And they could consume and leverage those. Now, customers, just like what you have out in Azure Commercial, you have subscriptions, right? So out in Azure Commercial, you're probably familiar with the subscription. Maybe you have an MSDN, or Work has subscriptions. And you can have a tenant, which is a customer, right? And they can have multiple subscriptions, just like you can in Azure Public. You can do that in Azure Stack. So here we see subscription A and subscription B. And in subscription A, they've selected offer 01, and they've got 2 different plans that are made available to them. And inside of those plans, there's different services they could use. This is basically going to manifest to the user. If you were to like look in the portal, they would have their subscription that they would create, and then they would be able to go in there and choose the Azure Stack services that are made available by these offers and plans. Okay, so subscriptions is how tenants get access to the offers, right? And tenants can buy offers via the different subscriptions and that sort of thing. And this ultimately is the taxonomy of Azure. Now, this might be a little confusing at first, but I'm going to show you a little bit more in our in our demo. But I think that this kind of captures it the best, right? So what region do I have what offers, and inside of the offer, what are the plans that an individual subscription could ultimately leverage that gives me access to those end services, right? So earlier I mentioned personas, and this is an important thing, and maybe this should have been at the start there, but when you're building those offers and plans and all that gibberish I was just mentioning, you're acting as the cloud administrator. So the same way Microsoft comes up with what services they're releasing to the public, you're coming up with what services you're going to release to your end users, right? To the consumers of Azure Stack in your organization, right? So there might be the dev team, there might be the DevOps people, there might be IT folks, whoever they are. You are the one that's going to come up with those offers and decide, well, can these people use MySQL? Yes or no, right? And that's the whole point of it. You're in charge, you're in control, right? Now, the tenant is the cloud customer. So this could be those teams, right? It might be those teams. Or if you're a solution provider that's going to roll out Azure Stack, the tenant can be a company that's a customer, right? And that tenant might have multiple subscriptions just like they have in the public cloud today. Okay, so let's look really quick at the touch points in the data center, right? So where does this thing connect back in? So if I have Azure Stack's physical sort of machines, you can see there it says a scale unit. That's like a stamp. That's what I was calling it. We've got a bunch of servers. Then there's the top of rack switches and the baseboard management controller. That's what BMC stands for. You can think of that as sort of like almost like ILO or something if you're familiar with that sort of thing. You can use it to update the BIOS on servers and that sort of thing. Now, that rack, if you will, is going to first of all have to be plugged in down at the bottom. It's space, in your data center. You've got to have a place to plug this thing in. This is a piece of hardware, right? This is a rack of gear. Okay. Now, the next integration point, kind of going from the bottom to the top, is the identity integration, right? So, if you think of the traditional kind of, we have Active Directory in our data center locally, we connect that to Azure AD, and now my people can log in to services out in Azure. We've got that synchronized. Azure Stack can be integrated into that, and frankly, it has to be integrated into that because that's where the directory comes from. So you're going to integrate your new Azure Stack implementation with your Azure AD out in the public cloud, right? Now, if you have an offline scenario, you can integrate it with ADFS and take Azure Stack offline, but you have to have ADFS in order for that to work. Now, finally, at the end, obviously, you're going to connect this into the rest of your data center. Maybe probably plug it into the core switch at 10 gig or something like that, multiple ports, that sort of thing, as well as integrated into your monitoring, your ITSM sort of functions, that sort of thing. And one of the key interesting sort of facts about this with respect to this hardware is that Microsoft is in control of the upgrades. Okay, you can't really get technically uncurrent, if you will, with the hardware. Many of us that have been around in the infrastructure for universe for a long time, the worst nightmare is always going into a customer who says they're having all kinds of problems, and they're like 12 versions too back on their BIOS upgrades or whatever you want to call it these days, right? And so, that's always a problem here, but Microsoft takes care of all of that from afar, even down to the firmware on the disks inside of the system, okay? And you actually can only stop one upgrade back. So they're really going to keep pushing people. And the reason why is because people are demanding that they add more services. In order for them to add more services, they need to be in control there. Now, here's another view of kind of how this looks, right? We've got, here's region 1, region 2. You can see the top of rack switches that are kind of connected into, the main kind of core network, and then all the servers that are all connected together, right? And we've got that, system that you would expect to see from a normal kind of data center implementation, right? So really quick, there's a couple of interesting, sort of ways or things to think about here, right? Why or how does Azure Stack fit in? And just want to hit a couple of these. One might be, you can't move to the public cloud, like I mentioned, right? But you want to use that same model. You're going to Azure, you're all in with it. You want to leverage the code that you're writing, the PowerShell, the ARM templates, things like that. You can leverage this and have some of your data and some of your applications down locally. And that also might manifest itself into or come around from industry regulations, right? Maybe your industry or your customers' industries, like healthcare, energy, law firms, things like that. They're very shy about going to the cloud. You could have some things in the public cloud and some things obviously down in Azure Stack, or all of it, frankly, in Azure Stack, and leverage the cloud as your platform. And then also there's the idea of latency, right? So if you have, or you deal with something like long-term sort of disconnected scenarios like cruise ships or airplanes, something like that, Azure Stack can run in those environments and make your investments in cloud technology, or writing things in microservices, things like that, you can that run in Azure, you can run them in those kinds of scenarios. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed this so far. We're going to pop out to the demo now, which I'm sure a lot of you are really interested. Let's stop blabbing. I want to give you a quick reminder. We are doing that Azure Stack course. So, if you have some software assurance vouchers or what have you, you can email sales@opsgility.com and, actually get on to do some training. So I wanted to first bring up here, and you probably see on the screen now, this is my Azure portal where I've logged in to our VM. So this is basically Azure Stack. This is a VM, but this is out in regular Azure. You can see this is running in the Opsgility real-time labs. If you do that course with us, or you want to use Azure Stack, you can leverage this. You can buy real-time credits that we have, and you can actually get into an Azure Stack host, which is what this is. So this guy here is an Azure Stack host, and it has Azure Stack running on it. I'm going to show you some pretty cool things. Now, the first thing that's kind of interesting, and remember, this is like a developer kit installation, right? You can do this on physical hardware. Obviously, we've got it running out in Azure. The first thing is that this machine is in a domain that is created during the Azure Stack deployment kit sort of installation called Azure Stack.local, right? So I've logged in here and I'm, set up. And if you want to see a little bit behind the covers before we check out Azure Stack, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start up Hyper-V Manager. And in Hyper-V Manager, what you can see is, first of all, wow, there's a lot of VMs there, right? And you can see, see something that says like DCO1 and SQL and, all kinds of things. And what these are is these are all of the virtual machines that are a part of the infrastructure that makes Azure Stack work, right? If I, even open up like Resource Manager here, you can take a look at, this is this machine. Let's see, what was this machine? It was if I dig into here, this machine running in Azure as kind of our demo box. I think it's an E16 V3. It's being kind of slow to load, so we'll come back to that in a second. But you can see here I've got 16 processors, right? And currently using 68 gig of RAM. Okay, so pretty beefy machine, like I mentioned. Yeah, here it says it's an E16S V3, so 16 vCPUs and 128 gig of RAM. So quite the big virtual machine, and you can see the reason why we need that. So these VMs here are the virtual machines that run the infrastructure to make Azure Stack possible. Now you see those couple of VMs up at the top there that have kind of a GUID. Those are VMs that I've built in Azure Stack. Right, so those are VMs that are running, and you can actually, like, if I double click on one of these, I can see the console of one of those virtual machines, right? So this is a virtual machine that I haven't showed you how you do it yet, but this is a virtual machine that was created using Azure Stack on this host, right? I can even log into this guy, right? So I can log in here, and it just like any other machine, I can get to it because this is the actual machine, one of the machines that I built, right? So I can see that's just an Ubuntu box, right? Now, to get on to Azure itself, right, to actually get in, Azure Stack and see Azure Stack, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up to the Azure Stack portal here, and the URL for this is adminportal.local.azurestack.external. You see that across the top there, and this is that Azure Stack portal that we mentioned, right? And so, what's interesting here is it looks and feels a lot like Azure, okay, if you're familiar with Azure, but there are some really strange looking things. The first thing is it says region management, right? And remember, I mentioned that you have to create a region just like Microsoft creates regions, right? So, this is our region, okay? It says local here, and we can see like some of the resource providers, we can see the different infrastructure roles. I can drill in on these, so like I can go and drill in on the infrastructure providers. We're all green, which is good. I can look at things like capacity, okay, and I can see what's the physical storage, how much physical storage. And remember, there is an infrastructure piece behind this. I have to run this again. Microsoft runs it out in the cloud, but here, this is my Azure Stack, so I'm responsible for it. See the number of IPs that are free, that sort of thing. So there's some components here that you're probably not used to dealing with that you're once again kind of responsible for. Okay, so a little bit of a different experience. There's another one here. It says update. Now there's no current update, but it says, you can see there, it says current stamp version. So when Microsoft starts to release updates, I'll have to go in here and click on the update, say update now, and it will update the Azure Stack infrastructure for me online, right? Now that we've done that, let's take the plunge here and let's create a few things. So, much in the same way that you're used to creating virtual machines, I can't do that yet here. I need to be the cloud admin. That's the persona that I'm in. So I'm going to go first here, and I click new, just like you've probably done before. And in offers and plans, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a plan. Okay. Now in this plan, what we'll do is we're going to give it the name. How about OG for Opsgility demo? How about plan 1? And that'll be the resource name. And we're going to create a new resource group here. You might be familiar with resource groups from regular Azure. This is a resource group, but on the admin side, right? So users aren't going to see this. This is for me as the admin. I'm going to create this plan, and the plan is a resource. Now, if we go into the services, I'm going to click on, and I'm going to add everything. So I'm going to add compute, key vault, networking, storage, and subscription, right? So I'm going to add all of those in, which will mean that all of these services can be used as a part of this plan. And then in the quotas, I'm going to go and select for this demo just the default quotas that are out there. Now you could create your own quotas, and you might be familiar with quotas in Azure Commercial if you in the past have maybe run out. A lot of times if you've tried to create too many VMs in one region, you might run out of quotas for a particular region. So you might only have 10 or 20 for a particular region, that sort of thing. So we've got our plan here that we're going to create. So basically OG demo plan, and we put in the services and the quota. So I'm going to click create, and that'll take just a second. It doesn't take very long to create the plans. And the next piece we're going to do is we're going to create the offer. Okay, remember that the plans are sort of stuck to the offers, right? And what will happen here is I'm going to select that plan when we create the offer. So I'm going to go back to new again. This time we'll just say offer here, and we'll have, how about OG demo offer 1, and we'll choose the same resource group. So OG demo, and then we're going to choose what's the base plan. Remember, there was base plans and add-on plans. So our base plan, we're going to go with our OG demo plan 1. We'll click select on that guy, and we could choose add-on plans, but I'm not going to do that right now. And we'll click create. So this is going to create our offer, right? Now, what's interesting about offers is you kind of get stuck with some of these things. You really need to do some upfront planning. The offers, once they're being consumed by like a subscription, you can't delete them. Now you can change them, but you can't delete them, right? So here now what we're going to see, and I can even go to my resource groups the same way you're probably used to. I can go into, and we'll use an OG demo here. I can see that we should have a plan and an offer, which we now do. Now I want to open up the offer because one of the things that we need to do is we need to make it to where people can use it. Now right now it says this offer is private, so no one can see it. So this would be basically while you're creating these. And I'm going to change the state of this to public now. And now that it's public, that means that users can add this to a subscription. So if we flip over now, and we're going to change our persona from being the cloud admin to being like a user or a tenant, right? Different portal. So this is like the portal you're used to using in Azure. So here, this is portal.local.azurestack.external, and this is the portal that you would use to create your virtual machines, which is what we're going to do. Actually, first, I'm going to create a new subscription. So on this subscription, we're going to call this, how about OG Demo Sub 1? And notice how we're going to select the offer that we want to choose. Now, there was some other ones in the system. We're going to choose the OG demo offer. And that offer is basically what we can use the subscription for. Okay, you see how those two kind of go together between what the cloud administrator created and now what the user is consuming. So here we're going to create this subscription, and it says it's been created, and we'll hit refresh just so that it's part of the portal now. And as a result from that, I can start to create things. Now let's go back over to the cloud portal for just a second, because there's one thing I want to show you. Remember I was talking about the Azure Marketplace before? Well, here's my marketplace. And we've already downloaded Ubuntu and Windows Server 2016. This is what I can choose, right, to create as far as marketplace items go. Now I can click this Add to Azure button, and this is going to go out and interrogate the Azure Marketplace, right? So while that's happening, let's create a VM really quick, because we're kind of running short on time. So I'm going to go here, and we're going to go to New Compute, and you notice how we see Windows Server and we see Ubuntu Server. Okay, so I can click on Create, and if you've done any built any VMs in Azure, this is going to feel really familiar to you, right? So OG demo VM1, I can put in a username, I can put an SSH key or a password. In this case, I'm going to put in a password, right? Choose the subscription. So we're going to choose that demo sub subscription we created. I'm going to create a new resource group. So how about OG demo RG? And this is obviously going to be local. We'll say OK. And the next thing I get, choose a size, just like you do in regular Azure. So we'll go with the D1, that's fine. And we'll click select. All of this feels exactly the same, doesn't it? If you've ever built any Azure VMs, look, it's going to build me a VNet, public IP addresses, all the same thing. So I'm going to click OK. Click OK again, and we're off to the races. We're building a VM in Azure Stack, right? Now we don't have enough time to see that, so I wanted to really quickly show you what does it look like to get on a VM. If you're on like this VM host, this would have been connected to your network, so you could SSH to that same VM, and I can SSH here. So like here's a virtual machine that I created when I was kind of messing around with this. I can grab this IP address for the SSH. I can open up something like PuTTY, attached to it, and I'm on the VM. So this is a VM created in Azure Stack, and I've now connected. And the same way that you might work with this VM is the same way it would work here, right? So as you can see, it's pretty easy stuff to use this to create it once you get started, right? And it's really neat how everything just kind of looks and feels exactly the same, and frankly it is, right? So here, by the way, here's all those marketplace items, right? Look at all these things out here. I mean, anything you can think of is out here, right? If your company uses CentOS and you say, okay, well, I like this, I want to download it, maybe we'll download the 7.4 version, right? You can just click on that, say download, and it's going to download that image to the marketplace, right? So pretty neat stuff, and I hope that you all enjoyed the demo and the webinar today, getting to know Azure Stack a little bit. Good luck with it. Come out and check out our website, Opsgility.com, and learn about this and all of Azure, and I really appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you.